story was sent to us by a regular viewer of this channel. It's about his best friend and his girlfriend's entanglement, and how he left no stone unturned in his quest for retribution on both. Ben had a so-called best friend named Gary. Ben is now 35 years old. His girlfriend Kirsty is 37, and Gary is 40. They've known each other for more than 20 years, as all three met at university. Gary was in his fourth and final year, and Ben was a freshman. Gary got evicted from his accommodation because he was unable to pay his rent. He was working in a bar after school, but his salary just wasn't enough, and he had to support his 3-year-old daughter, Amelia. Ben was living off campus and felt really sorry for Gary, so he offered to let him sleep on the sofa bed in the living room until they could figure something out. They eventually came to an agreement for Gary to stay in the living room and contribute 30% towards rent, bills, food, etc. A favour that would later turn out to be a huge mistake. For the first 6 months, Gary contributed his 30%. For the remaining 6, Ben had to pay it all. And that wasn't all either. Gary even started wearing Ben's clothes without asking. Ben wasn't happy about that, but he kept quiet. Ben started dating Kirsty, who was living on campus. They'd only been seeing each other for 4 months when a student who lived on campus told Ben that she'd seen Gary leaving Kirsty's room on several occasions. When Ben confronted them both about it, Gary said that he'd been helping her with her math. Ben was so gullible he believed him. Another mistake he'd later regret. Things went from bad to worse for Gary. It turned out that he was unable to pay the last 6 months of his university fees, and he wouldn't be allowed to sit his final exams unless he paid the outstanding balance in full. Ben offered to lend Gary the money so he could sit his final exams. After university, Gary started working and paid back most of the money to Ben. To cut a long story short, after Ben finished university, he got a job working for a corporate company. Over the years, he worked really hard and established himself in the company, overseeing some of the biggest contracts for them. A managerial position was up for grabs, which could potentially double his salary. He had been waiting for that opportunity since the day he started. Gary was unemployed and in a lot of debt. He was on the verge of losing his home. So Ben, unselfishly, recommended Gary for the position. He personally took Gary's application to one of the top directors to ensure he was in pole position to get this job. To cut a long story short, 18 months after Ben helped Gary secure the managerial job he'd been working so hard to get, he discovered hard evidence that Gary and his fiancée had been sleeping together regularly for many, many years. Ben vowed to take the harshest revenge on both of them. If you're enjoying this life story so far, please consider giving it a thumbs up or subscribing. Maybe share it with a friend or two. It helps the algorithm recognize us. One evening after work, Ben and Gary met up with Gary's daughter Amelia at a bar for her 24th birthday. Gary went to use the toilet and left his phone on the bar counter. A message popped up from Kirsty. It read, "I miss you so much. I can't wait to see you again." Ben was stunned. He felt sick to his stomach and threw up on the spot. He decided not to confront Gary just yet. He wanted concrete evidence. So he decided to hire a private investigator. The private investigator instructed Ben to install an app on Kirsty's mobile that would give him access to her location, messages, past and present, and practically everything else. It didn't take the investigator long to access Kirsty's phone. When the investigator emailed the findings to Ben, he was nervous about what he might see. There were hundreds of explicit videos, messages, nude photos, voice messages, and texts between Gary and Kirsty, dating back 19 years to their university days. He broke down and wept in agony when he learned from the messages that Kirsty had a termination of pregnancy because she was uncertain on who the father was. Ben felt utterly betrayed. He felt a rage that was 10 times more than he'd ever felt before, like his heart had been ripped out of his chest and trampled on. Gary was engaged to his fiancée Susan, and they were due to be married in 18 months. He had asked Ben to be his best man. Ben asked the investigator to keep the findings confidential. He planned to take the ultimate revenge on both Gary and Kirsty. He befriended Amelia, Gary's daughter, who was 11 years his junior. While talking to her, he discovered that she had low self-esteem. He encouraged her to think highly of herself and told her how beautiful she was. Within a few weeks, she started developing strong feelings for him, and eventually, they began sleeping together. Back when they were in university, Kirsty's best friend Chloe had tried to kiss Ben. He pushed her away out of respect for Kirsty and didn't mention it to her to preserve the friendship between the two. Now, he went to meet Chloe and asked her why she had tried to kiss him back in university. Chloe replied, "Because I always liked you. Why do you ask?" Ben replied, "I always liked you too. That's why I wanted to know." They ended up sleeping together that very same night. Ben was now sleeping with both Gary's daughter and Kirsty's best friend on a regular basis as part of his ultimate revenge. Still, it wasn't enough. So he set his sights on Susanna, Gary's fiancée. Over the years, Susanna had regularly complained to Ben that she suspected Gary was sleeping around. Ben knew her suspicions were true, but never confirmed them. He'd always stayed loyal. One afternoon, Susanna called Ben and asked if he knew where Gary was. Kirsty wasn't home either, and Ben tried to call her but got no reply. So he decided to track Kirsty's phone, and it showed her location at a hotel across town, one she frequently visited with Gary according to the investigators' reports. Susanna asked him to come by, so he decided to seize the moment. He photocopied a few of the messages of Gary and Kirsty's entanglement, including a nude selfie of the two of them in bed. Ben turned up at Gary's house with a bottle of red wine and an envelope in his jacket pocket. After a few glasses of wine, Susan looked a bit tipsy. She stepped towards him, and out of nowhere, she started kissing him. He was surprised. He hadn't expected that at all. They ended up sleeping together. Ben left Gary's house feeling guilty. He sat in his car and let out a loud scream, feeling awful about what had happened. The next day, Susanna called him and said what happened the night before was a big mistake and that it must not happen again. To cut a long story short, let's fast forward 18 months down the line. Ben had been promoted to a director at the company where he worked. Gary and Susanna now had an 8-month-old baby girl. Gary's daughter Amelia was 5 months pregnant, and Kirsty's friend Chloe was also 5 months pregnant. On the day of Gary and Susanna's wedding, Ben had second thoughts about being the best man for such a disloyal friend. The wedding ceremony went smoothly, and Gary and Susanna were now husband and wife. The reception was in full swing when Ben asked Gary to step outside into the parking lot for a quick chat. Ben asked if he was having an affair with Kirsty. Gary was taken back by this question. "No way, I would never do that to you, bro," he replied. While they were outside talking, a commotion erupted inside. Family members were consoling Susanna. Gary rushed back in, only to be met with a barrage of objects thrown at him from all angles by Susanna's family. The big screen TV on the wall was covered with WhatsApp messages, voice messages, and at the center of attention, a nude selfie of Gary and Kirsty. Ben took the mic, and suddenly the whole room went quiet. "I would like to apologize to Susanna and Amelia in advance for what I'm about to say," he began. "Gary, you are my best friend. I made a lot of selfless sacrifices for you. You knew how I felt about Kirsty, yet for years you've been sleeping with her behind my back. But I have news for you both. Kirsty, your best friend Chloe, 5 months pregnant. Gary, as I said, you were supposed to be my best friend. Your daughter Amelia is also 5 months pregnant, and I'm the father. There's even a possibility I might be the father of your 8-month-old daughter as well." Gary put his head in his hands and started crying, but that didn't stop everyone from hating on him and Kirsty. To Ben's surprise, Gary's daughter Amelia took his hand, led him to the car, and they both got in and drove away. So what do you think? Did Ben go too far? Or did Gary and Kirsty deserve it? Who do you feel more sympathy for? Ben, Gary, or Kirsty? And why? Hit that subscribe button and give us a thumbs up. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. It's free to subscribe.